Ah, the World Economic Forum, where fake philanthropists convene to promote population reduction. Observation: you can't be a humanitarian if you hate humanity. According to media sources, something may have been afoot at the World Economic Forum. According to The Guardian, it wasn't just Bill Gates or George Soros who ditched it, but of the 1,200 invitees, only 400 showed up. The last time attendance took a dip like this was right before the September 11th terrorist attacks. And speaking of attacks, one of the neologisms coined at the event was the term Polycrisis. The attendees kept referring to a world in Polycrisis, a very similar concept to one espoused in the recent COP27 climate change conference a few months ago. In their accompanying document, Human Development Report 2021-2022, they talked about how to subdue populations and keep them disorganized with what they called the four motivating principles, namely, number 1, traumatizing events, number 2, physical illness, number 3, general climate anxiety, and number 4, food insecurity. By traumatizing events, they meant things like 9/11 or economic crashes. By physical illness, well, you know what that one means with viruses and such. By general climate anxiety, they're referring to things like hurricanes. And by food insecurity, it's all about hyperinflation placing its limits on the diet of the average family. By exploiting these techniques, these motivating principles as they call them, or as the World Economic Forum calls it, polycrisis, you can subdue a populace. Otherwise, the population might give in to the easy gratification of finger-pointing, which could lead to them identifying culprits or villains and having a distrust of institutions and elites when they cast about who to identify for collapsing the global economic system, as we sleepwalk into World War III, as Brazilian journalist Pepe Escobar frames it. He writes, "As for China's Vice Premier Liu He, with his vast knowledge of finance, science, and technology, at least he was very helpful to lay down Beijing's 5 top guidelines for the foreseeable future, beyond the customary imperial xenophobia. China will focus on expanding domestic demand, keeping industrial and supply chains smooth, go for the healthy development of the private sector, deepen state enterprise reform, and aim for attractive foreign investment." Note his phrase about China expanding its domestic demand. This means that they'll rely more on selling things to their own population rather than being the world shop floor tied to the global system. So China appears to be signaling that they plan on contracting inward. The aforementioned Guardian is saying that this may not bode well in terms of simmering international tensions. In writing about the World Economic Forum summit, they say, "If that sounds like a less confident assertion of global capitalism's successes than you're used to, you're onto something." Last year, Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz wrote for The Guardian that at the Slim Down 2022 event, a forum traditionally committed to championing globalization was primarily concerned with globalization's failures. There's a particular Davos worldview. Globalization offers more solutions than problems, but it needs to be managed, Larry said. It is a more difficult environment for that now. Countries are more inward-looking. They're shortening their supply chains. They're making sure they're not vulnerable to global events. There's an argument that we've had peak globalization, and we've had peak Davos as well. Countries are more inward-looking? This implies that nation-states are getting ready for collapsing global supply chains, the kind of disruptions that happen when war looms on the horizon. The rest of the world may be getting sick of NATO's forever war model. They may want to opt out of the polycrisis method of controlling populations, and this split of the global south from the Western banking grid might signal only one thing. Harvard-China scholar Graham Allison, in his book Destined for War, says that if 16 times when this happened in the past, war erupted in 12 of those times. Whatever the future holds, the best advice just might be, buckle your seatbelts. If you've gotten this far, you must like our content. If you haven't already, head to thenewamerican.com and subscribe to our print magazine, published twice a month in print and daily online. It's the essential news source for freedom-loving Americans.